Hey everyone, Miss Knittycat here, and I'm back after a bit of a break to show you my latest project, which is this lattice lace blanket. And in this video, I'm going to demonstrate to you the lattice lace stitch, as well as I've provided instructions for this blanket that is still currently a work in progress. I have knit up about, I want to say 3 feet in length, maybe a little bit bigger, and I'm hoping that it'll be a big blanket. It's about three and a half feet in width, and I'm hoping it'll be at least 5 feet in length. And the blanket itself, I've put a garter stitch border at the bottom, and then I have a garter stitch border on either side of the blanket, as you can see here. So I've provided the details for the pattern, for this blanket pattern, and once the blanket is done, I'll have another video on the update of this blanket. But I love this stitch, the lattice lace stitch. It provides a very nice sort of crisscross pattern without the use of cables. It's just regular knitting, but there are a few little finicky techniques involved. You have to do knit two together and slipping stitches and passing slip stitches over. So I'll show you all that in just a minute, but just wanted to point out that the level of difficulty for this, I would put it at an advanced beginner, maybe more closer to an intermediate knitter, just because of some of the details involved. Now the pattern itself is a 12-row repeat, and I've provided the pattern below. This is a traditional pattern, that the lattice lace. The blanket pattern that I've provided is my own, but the knit pattern itself is just, it's traditional. Now what I've done, and I think what works best when you're doing these multi-row patterns, is either print out the pattern, or I've made a little cheat sheet here for me that I follow. And then because it's a 12-row pattern, having a row counter like that works, especially when you're first getting started. So I would recommend either having a row counter or just a notepad with a pencil, and you can count the rows that you're on, at least when you're first getting started. So let's get going with the pattern. Now for this blanket, I used the Lion Brand Yarns Pound of Love yarn. It's 1 pound each skein, and the skein is pretty big when you first start off. This is what's left right now, and I have a red one, or a gray one rather, and a red one. So that's why I've used 2 colors. You can choose to do it just in one color with a variegated color, or with a solid color, or multiple, more than just 2 colors. Anyway, let's get started. So I have cast on a few stitches here. Now the pattern is a multiple of 8 stitches plus 3 stitches. So what I've done here is I've cast on 19 stitches. So that's a multiple of 8, which is 8 times 2, 16 plus 3 stitches. So you only have to add the 3 stitches one time. And that's the lattice lace pattern. Now in the blanket, I additionally have 5 stitches on either end to make that garter stitch border. And so the pattern, when you look at the pattern and the number of stitches I've cast on there, it's a multiple of 8 plus 3 for the pattern, plus 10 stitches because of 5 stitches on either side. And that'll all be clear when you read through the pattern. Okay, let's get started. Now it is a 12-row repeat, and what I've done here is I've just put a couple rows of knit stitch just at the bottom. You don't have to have this, but it helps from the work curling on itself a little bit. Now the pattern, the great thing about the pattern is every alternate row is just a purl stitch all the way back. So it's just the odd rows, row 1, row 3, etc., that have the sort of more complicated pattern. The even rows are all just purl all the way, except of course if you're putting that garter stitch border. Okay, so let's get started. Now the first row of the lattice lace pattern itself is you knit the first stitch, then you knit 2 together, and what that means is 2 stitches together. You're going to insert your needle through both stitches and knit 2 together. Now I have a link below in the description field to a slower demonstration of this knit 2 together. All right, so knit 1, knit 2 together, then knit 1. Then you bring the yarn over, which means you just take this yarn from the back and bring it to the front, okay? And then you knit 1. Now as you do that, you are creating a stitch, and that is okay, that is intentional. Then the pattern tells you to SL1 or slip 1. And what that means is you're going to just carry over this next stitch. You're going to slip it from the left needle onto the right needle. So you're just going to insert as if to purl and just slip it over. Okay, and then knit 1. And now it says psso, which stands for pass the slip stitch over. Now this is the last stitch that we just knit, and this stitch right here was the stitch that we slipped without doing anything to it. So you're going to take your left needle, you're going to insert it into the stitch on the right needle, and you're going to pass it over this upper stitch. So what I like to do is I like to hold on a little bit to that upper stitch as I bring this over and pass it. Okay, we'll see that one more time as I repeat this whole set. So slip 1, knit 1, pass the slip stitch over, and then you knit 2. And you'll notice that the pattern will say, there's an asterisk in the pattern, and the pattern will say to repeat this little bit that we just did. You're going to keep repeating this all the way down to until you have maybe 2 stitches left. So you're going to knit 2 together, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, pass the slip stitch over, and knit 2. Now we're going to repeat the whole sequence again. So knit 2 together, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, pass that slipped stitch over. So you're just picking up the stitch and you're passing it over. And I've provided a link to a slower demonstration of this if you want a slower look at this or a refresher. And then knit 1, knit 2. So you're going to keep doing this until you get to the last 2 stitches. And then those 2 stitches you're just going to knit 2. Okay. Now the alternate rows, the even rows, are just all purl. So I'm just going to purl through this row. And you'll have to bear with me. This is just regular purl. Now the one thing I will say is that when you're doing this purl row, remember those places where we brought the yarn over or brought the yarn to the front? When you come across those stitches, they'll hang really loose on the needle, and I'll show you what I mean in just a second. So right here is a stitch. That was a passed over stitch. You can see how it's really loose. It's just hanging there. You want to just be a little bit careful because those ones, it's really easy for that stitch to slip out. So if that happens, don't worry, just put it back on and knit. Okay, so that was row 2 done. And again, if you have a counter or you're noting it down, just click on it. And so I'm already at row 2 here. Okay, row 3, you're gonna knit 2 together, then knit 1, then yarn over or yarn to the front, knit 1, yarn to the front again, knit 1. So you're doing yarn over, knit 1 twice, then we slip 1, knit 1, pass the slip stitch over, and that's your repeat for this row. So you're going to keep repeating this till you get to the last 3 stitches. So we've got one more repeat here in this small sample. So I'm going to do it again. Knit 2 together, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, pass the slip stitch over. And when you get to the last 3 stitches, you're just going to knit them. Knit 1, knit 2, knit 3. And that's row number 3. You do row number 4. Again, just a purl. So knitting this blanket, I have to say, it doesn't make for really good TV knitting because you really have to focus on those odd rows, the rows that you're doing all this knit 2 together, pass slip stitch over, all of that stuff. The purl rows are good ones though. So if you're watching something like Netflix or something, you can pause while you do that row, and then you can turn it back on when you're doing the purl row and do your TV knitting. Or you don't have to do TV knitting, you can just be focused on your knitting. and that's row 4. Okay, now row 5. And now each of the rows, the pattern is slightly different. There's some similarity between rows 1 and 7 and rows 3 and 9 and rows rows 5 and 11 just a little bit. So there's a little bit of similarity, but each row is a little bit different. So you do have to focus. Now row 5, you start off by knitting the first 2 stitches. So you knit 1, knit 2, yarn over, knit 1, 2, 3, yarn over, knit 1, and then slip, knit, pass the slip stitch over. Okay, and then you knit 1, and this is your repeat. So the repeat is yarn over, knit 1, knit 2, knit 3, yarn over, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, pass the slip stitch over, and then knit 1. That'll leave you, you keep repeating that until you're down to the last stitch, at which point you're just going to knit that stitch. So that is row 5 done. Row 6 is just purl again. Now before I forget, one point is that because this is a lace pattern, with lace patterns occasionally what happens is, let's say you've cast on 100 stitches for your project. With each row, the row where you do these knit 2 together things, with each row your stitch count can actually decrease on a particular row and then increase back to the number of stitches that you cast in the next row. So if you were to stop at the end of row 1, you'll notice that your work has actually gone down by a few stitches depending on the number of repeats you have. And so don't go to count the stitches, especially if you think you've made a mistake or something. Don't go to count the stitches until you've finished the whole 12 row repeat. Okay, all right, so that was row 6, so we're halfway there. Now row 7. So for row 7, it starts off with knitting the first 4 stitches, and then the rest of it is very similar to the repeats of row 1. So then it goes knit 2 together, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, pass the slip stitch over. And as I pass this, I just want you to note, hopefully you can see it in the video here, but I just want you to note, you can see how the slip stitches from each alternate row are starting to form in that nice diagonal that gives you the pattern. So that's one way that you can tell as you're working through that you're at the right part, that you haven't messed up in the previous stitches. But that's just one indicator. You'll see that slip stitch. All right, so slip 1, knit 1, pass the slip stitch over, and then knit 1, knit 2. And we repeat that one more time. We knit 2 together, knit 1, slip or yarn over, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, pass the slip stitch over. And now for row 7, it'll tell you to keep doing the repeat until you reach the last 7 stitches. So right now, since I only have 2 repeats here for row 7, in this case, in this demonstration, I'm just doing the repeat one time, because then that leaves me with the last 7 stitches, which I'm on right now. And so at the end, I'll just have a single knit 1. Okay, and that's row 7. And row 8, put that on my counter there, and row 8 is just purl, and occasionally that'll happen, your needle will drop, and that's okay, we just pick the stitch back up. So this is And row 9 is very similar also now to row 3. Just like row 7 was similar to row 1, row 9 is similar to row 3 except for the number of stitches you knit first. So here, row 9, you actually knit the first 3 stitches. And then the pattern, the repeat pattern, is the same as row 3. So you knit 2 together, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1. So we're doing that yarn over, knit 1 twice, then slip 1, knit 1, pass the slip stitch over. And again, you're seeing that nice little diagonal forming. All right, and you keep repeating this all the way to the end. So knit 2 together, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, pass the slip stitch over. And that is row 9. I forgot to click it after I did row 8. So anyway, I've now clicked it and we're done with row 9. Row 10, which is just a purl. And I'm using double pointed needles here as always, just for the demonstration, because they're shorter needles. Don't need double pointed needles for this project. Actually, if you knit for this stitch, if you knit the blanket though, you will need a circular needle. So I'm using I believe it's size 7 circular needles for my blanket, and I provided all the details in the description field below. All right, so that was row 10. Now row 11 is knit 2. So you're going to knit the first 2 stitches. Remember, it's knit 2 and not knit 2 together. So just knitting the first 2 stitches. Then your repeat starts. You knit 2 together, knit 1, yarn over, knit 3, yarn over, knit 1, and that's your repeat. You're going to keep doing that till you get to the last stitch. So knit 2 together, knit 1, yarn over, and you knit these 3 stitches, the next 3 stitches, yarn over, knit 1. You keep doing this till you get to the last stitch, which you will then knit. And then the final row, row 12, is just purl all the way down. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that one. But there you can see the pattern forming. So as you keep doing this and you keep doing the 12 row repeats, your work will form this beautiful lattice that you can see. Very nice lattice pattern. It lays really nice and flat. And once I'm done with the blanket, if I block it, then I can get this a little bit flatter. Or you can leave it like this and have these nice little ridges of the lattice forming and have them be a little bit bumpy. So I really, really like this. Now, when you do want to switch colors, now let's say you want to switch colors, you'll actually finish out the 12th row. You'll come back to this end. You want to change your colors while you're on the right side of the work, because otherwise what ends up happening is that, especially on your borders, you're going to start to see that color bleeding on the right side, and you don't want that happening. On the right side, you want a clean edge. And so always finish your 12 rows. I would say finish your 12 rows and then change color. But right now, just to demonstrate, I'm going to show you, if you did want to change your color at this point to make the next stripe, let me just find some yarn here. Here we go. Okay, so let's say I'm going to use this beautiful dark pink color here. All you want to do is just make, you don't have to tie a knot or anything like that. Just make a loop, not even a loop, just hold the yarn like that and insert your needle. I'm going to do a knit stitch here to show you, because you're going to be at a knit stitch. So insert your needle and just start knitting with this yarn. So you're just going to hook it on there and you're going to knit. Okay. And then just make sure you are picking the working yarn, not the tail of the new yarn that you just joined, and keep knitting. Now, after you've knit a few stitches, you can come over here to the edge, just tighten this up. Your previous yarn, which you're actually going to snip, okay? Especially if you're making big stripes for the blanket, you're going to snip that yarn, and then you're going to take this little tail of the new yarn and the leftover tail of the old yarn, and you can just tie a single knot just to hold it in place right now. At the end, after your blanket is done, you will need to weave these ends in into the wrong side of the work. So I've got a lot of weaving to do at the end, I know, but if you want to do it in stripes, if you just did it all in one color, then you don't have to worry about the joining the yarn. And so I hope you give the stitch a try. You don't have to make a blanket. You could make just a scarf even with it. And I think it'll look really pretty. Now, one thing to keep in mind, the pattern that I've showed you in this demonstration is just the pattern for the lattice lace. So when you do your blanket, if you do follow my pattern for the blanket, remember I've added on 5 stitches on either end. So what you might want to do is after 5 stitches, put a little clippy marker, so that reminds you that that's the border. Those 5 stitches have to always be knitted every single row. And so between the 2 clippy markers is where your lattice lace pattern will be worked. So those stitches in between the 2 clippy markers will be need to be a multiple of 8 stitches plus 3 stitches. So you'll see that I've actually cast on 173 stitches for this blanket. If you subtract out these 10 stitches, the 5 stitches on either side, that brings it down to 163, which is a multiple of 8 plus 3. So look through the pattern. If you have any questions at all, please leave me a comment. I love to read your comments, and I will do my best to respond to them. And I hope you subscribe to my channel, Knittycat's Knits, for more upcoming videos. And as always, thanks for watching. Happy knitting!